There is a sound an axe makes when it bites through mail and the flesh beneath. Not the clean ring of steel on steel, but something wet and final. A crack, like river ice breaking, followed by the rush of air from punctured lungs. I heard that sound 47 times before the spear took me from below. 47 English warriors fell to my axe on those narrow planks, while the rest of Hardrada's army scrambled for their lives behind me. The river ran red beneath the bridge that day, and I remember thinking, as the iron point pierced my groin and the strength fled my legs, that this was not how the sagas said it would end. They promised us Valhalla. They promised us glory. They did not mention the taste of blood in your mouth as you drown in a shallow English stream, watching your king die 50 paces away with his guts spilling onto foreign soil. Some men say the gods write our fates before we are born, that every breath, every sword stroke, every moment of courage or cowardice is already carved into the great tree's roots. I do not know if this is true, but I know that on the 25th day of September in the year of our Lord 1066, the gods wrote an ending to the age of Vikings, and I was there to see it written in blood and iron, and the broken bodies of the finest warriors Norway ever raised. My name is Bjorn Eriksson, and I was a herdman in the service of Harald Sigurdsson, called Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. I stood in his shield wall at Fulford. I drank with him in the halls of York. I held the bridge at Stamford while he died behind me. This is the story of the last day of the Viking Age. But I must go back to where it all began. Not to the morning of the battle, but to the months before, when Harald first spoke of England and the crown he meant to take. I had served him for 8 years by then, since I was 16 winters old. I had never seen battle when I joined Harald's hird. I had never killed a man. I had never understood what it meant to swear an oath that might demand your death. Harald Hardrada was not a kind man, but he was a great one. He stood half a head taller than any warrior in his hall, with arms thick as oak branches, and a voice that could carry across a battlefield. They said he had fought for the emperor in Miklagard, in lands so far south that men's skin turned black from the sun. They said he had killed a lion with his bare hands. They said he was touched by Odin himself, blessed with a warrior's fury that made him unstoppable in battle. I believed all of it. Every man in his service believed it. When you stood near Harald Hardrada, you felt the weight of his legend pressing down on you like a physical thing. It made you want to be worthy of serving such a man. It made you want to die for him if the gods demanded it. In the summer of 1066, Harald called his jarls to Trondheim and told them he would take the throne of England. King Edward the Confessor had died with no son to follow him, and the English had crowned Harold Godwinson, a mere earl, Harald said. Harald Hardrada had such a right, he claimed. Through old treaties and ancient promises, through bloodlines stretching back to Canute the Great, the throne was his by law and by the will of the gods. I did not understand half the justifications he offered. I only knew that my king had decided to make war, and I would follow him into it. The jarls argued. Some said Norway was enough, that we should tend our own lands and let the English squabble over their crown. Others spoke of the cost in men and silver, of the risk of leaving Norway undefended. But Harald was not a man who accepted argument for long. When old Jarl Thorstein suggested we might wait another year, gather more allies, plan more carefully, Harald rose from his seat and the hall fell silent. I will go to England this season, he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of that great timber hall. I will take the throne that is mine by right. Those who love me will come. Those who fear me will stay behind and tend their sheep. Choose now which sort of man you are. They chose. Within a month, Harald had assembled a fleet of 300 ships, not the small coastal traders we used for Viking raids, but proper war vessels with crews of 50 or 60 men each. From every fjord and harbour in Norway, warriors came to join the great army. Hirdmen like myself, sworn to Harald's service. Bondy farmers looking for glory and plunder. Even a few berserkers, those mad warriors who fought without armour and feared no death because they believed the gods rode within them. I remember standing on the shore at Solund, watching the ships gather. The harbour was so thick with vessels you could barely see the water between them. Dragon prows carved and painted. Shields hung along the rails in rows of red and yellow and black. The air smelled of pine tar and salt, and the sweat of thousands of men loading weapons and provisions. It was the largest fleet Norway had raised since the days of Knut, men said, perhaps the largest that would ever sail. At night we sat around fires on the beach and shared mead and told stories. The older warriors spoke of raids in their youth, of silver taken from Irish monasteries and Saxon towns. They spoke of Hardrada's service in the Varangian Guard, how he had returned from Miklagard with chests of gold and a reputation as the fiercest fighter in Christendom. The younger men boasted of what they would do when we reached England, which Saxon lords they would kill, which women they would take, how many arm rings they would earn. I said little. I was 24 winters old, and I had fought in 3 small battles, border skirmishes with Swedish raiders, where the shield walls had broken after a few minutes of shoving, and the casualties could be counted on 2 hands. I knew enough of war to know I did not know enough. So I listened, and I sharpened my axe, and I tried not to think about dying in a foreign land. We sailed in early September, when the autumn storms were still weeks away and the winds blew fair from the north. Harald divided the fleet into squadrons, each under a trusted jarl, and took the lead ship himself, a massive vessel called Ormen with a golden dragon at her prow. I sailed 3 ships back, close enough to see Harald standing at the steering oar, his hair and beard streaming in the wind like battle flags. The crossing took 5 days. For men used to the open sea, it was easy sailing, but many of the younger Bondi had never been far from shore, and they suffered badly. The ships stank of vomit and fear. At night, when we beached on the Scottish islands to rest, I would walk away from the fires and stand alone watching the stars, wondering if I would ever see Norway again. We were joined off the coast of Orkney by Tostig Godwinson, the exiled Earl of Northumbria. Tostig came with his own ships, only a dozen, but filled with experienced fighters, men who knew the English lands and hated Harald Godwinson with a personal fury. Tostig was Harald's brother, though you would never know it to hear him speak. He called Harald a usurper and a betrayer, said he had stolen the earldom that was rightfully Tostig's. Harald Hardrada welcomed him as an equal, promised him lands and title when the conquest was complete. I did not trust Tostig. There was something wrong in a man who would make war on his own blood. But Harald seemed to value him, and it was not my place to question my king's alliances. We landed at Rickhall, on the River Ouse, south of York, in mid-September. 300 ships lined the riverbanks for a mile or more, and 8,000 warriors poured onto English soil like a flood. The local villagers fled before us. Those who did not flee quickly enough were killed or taken as thralls. We burned their barns and took their livestock and planted our banners in the muddy fields. This was England. This was the land Harald meant to rule. On the 20th of September, 5 days after landing, we met the English army at Fulford. The Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, Edwin and Morcar, boys barely older than I was, had raised the northern levies and marched to stop us before we could take York. They had chosen their ground well, a narrow strip of solid land between the river and a marsh, where our numbers would count for less. But they had not reckoned with Harald Hardrada's fury. I stood in the shield wall that day, in the second rank, my axe ready and my heart hammering against my ribs. The English came at us in the morning mist, a wall of shields and spears that seemed to stretch forever. The ground beneath us was soft, torn up by hundreds of feet, and the air smelled of river mud and the marsh grass rotting in the heat. When the lines met, the noise was like thunder. Shield crashed against shield, iron against iron, and men screamed and cursed and died in the press. I killed my first Englishman in the first minutes, a spearman who lunged at the man in front of me and left himself open. My axe caught him in the side, just below the ribs where his leather armor ended, and he went down spraying blood. I do not remember his face. I remember only the resistance of his body against the blade, the way it pulled at my arms when I wrenched the axe free. After that, it was all chaos. We pushed forward step by step, the shield wall grinding against theirs like two great millstones. Men fell on both sides, trampled into the mud, drowning in the marsh water that seeped across the battlefield. The wounded screamed for help, but there was no help to give. If you broke formation to aid a fallen friend, you died. Harald was everywhere. He fought at the front, his great two-handed sword rising and falling like a harvester's scythe, and wherever he went, the English gave ground. He was not wearing armor. Hardrada never wore armor when the battle rage took him, said it slowed him down, and he trusted the gods to protect his life. His bare chest was slick with sweat and splattered with other men's blood, and he roared his war cries in a voice that carried over the clash of battle. "Follow me!" he shouted. "Follow, and we feast in York tonight!" And we followed. We could not help but follow. The English line broke near midday. Their left flank, pressed back into the marsh, lost cohesion and began to crumble. Our warriors surged forward, and the retreat became a rout. Edwin and Morcar managed to extract what was left of their forces and fled north toward York, leaving hundreds of their men dead in the mud and water. We did not pursue far. Harald called us back, reformed the shield wall, and surveyed the field. I have never seen such a sight. The dead lay in heaps where the fighting had been thickest. English and Norwegian mixed together, their blood indistinguishable in the churned earth. The marsh water was red. Carrion birds were already circling overhead. We had won a great victory. We had lost perhaps 200 men. The English had lost 1,000 or more. That night we made camp on the battlefield, and Harald held a feast among the corpses. Barrels of ale looted from nearby farms were opened. Meat was roasted over fires built from shattered shields, and the Jarls toasted our king's brilliance. I sat with my sword brothers and drank until the shaking in my hands stopped. This is what war is, I thought. This is what the sagas never quite explain. The way your body keeps fighting long after your mind has gone numb. The way you can laugh and drink with friends while surrounded by the smell of death. This is what it means to be a warrior. York surrendered the next day without a fight. The city fathers came to Harald's camp with gifts and promises, offered hostages and tribute if he would spare their lives and property. Harald agreed. He was generous in victory. There was no massacre, no burning of the city. He simply took what he wanted: silver, provisions, pledges of loyalty. Tostig advised him to garrison the city, hold it against any counterattack, but Harald waved the suggestion away. "There will be no counterattack," he said. "Harald Godwinson is in the south, waiting for the Normans to invade. By the time he learns we are here, we will control half of England." We settled into York like conquerors. The alehouses were commandeered for our use, the finest halls given over to Harald and his Jarls. I walked the Roman walls and looked out over the countryside, golden with late harvest, and thought this might actually work. Harald might actually take the throne. We might all become rich men, lords of estates in this green land. For 5 days we rested. We drank and ate and shared out the first plunder. Some of the men took English women, willing or not. Dice games ran all night in the halls. It felt like the hard part was over, like the fighting was done, and all that remained was to accept Harald Godwinson's surrender when he finally arrived. On the 24th of September, Harald announced we would march to Stamford Bridge the next day to collect more hostages from the surrounding districts. It was an easy march, he said, just 7 miles from York. We would go lightly, no need for full armor in the late summer heat, no need to bring the whole army, just enough warriors to overawe the local lords and show Harald's power. I should have known better. We all should have known better. No great saga begins with a hero growing complacent. But we were drunk on victory and the wine of York, and we believed our own legends. We believed Harald Hardrada was invincible. We believed the gods had chosen us for glory. We believed, right up until the moment we saw the dust cloud on the horizon and realized the English army had come. We reached Stamford Bridge in the late morning of the 25th, and the day was already growing hot. The bridge itself was nothing impressive. A wooden structure barely wide enough for 2 men to cross abreast, spanning the River Derwent where it ran shallow and quick over stones. The water was clear enough to see fish darting in the depths, and willows grew along the banks, their leaves just beginning to turn yellow with the changing season. It was a peaceful place, beautiful in its way. It would be soaked in blood before the day ended. Harald had brought perhaps 3,000 warriors, less than half our total force. The rest he had left at the ships in Chronicle with his son Olaf. or scattered in York enjoying the spoils of conquest. Those of us who marched wore light tunics and leather, left our heavy mail behind because of the heat and because we expected no fighting. We brought weapons, of course. A warrior is never truly unarmed, but shields were carried on backs instead of arms. Axes hung from belts instead of gripped ready for battle. We were an army in name only. In truth, we were a column of men walking to a meeting, laughing and joking, and thinking of the feast we would have that night. I walked near the middle of the column with my sword brothers, young hirdmen like myself, who had fought at Fulford and thought ourselves veterans now. Olaf Thorson was telling a story about a Saxon girl he had bedded in York, embellishing the details to make us laugh. Eric Blackhair was complaining about the heat, saying Norway never got this hot even in midsummer, and how could the English stand it? Kettle Longface was singing a dirty song about a Jarl's wife, and we all joined in the chorus. We were 20 miles from our ships. We were in enemy territory. We had just fought a major battle 5 days before, and we were marching like farmers going to market. The first sign something was wrong came from Tostig's outriders. They came galloping back along the column, their horses lathered with sweat, shouting for Harald. The king was at the head of the column, walking with his jarls, and I was too far back to hear what was said. But I saw Harald stop. I saw him turn and look east, toward the road from York. I saw his hand go to his sword hilt. Then someone shouted, "Army approaching!" And everything changed. The column halted. Warriors scrambled for their shields, checked their weapons. The jarls were bellowing orders, trying to form a defensive line. But we were strung out along the road for half a mile, and the ground was open farmland with no natural defenses. Harald pushed his way to a small rise, and I followed with the other herdmen, climbing up to see what he was seeing. The sight stole the breath from my chest. Coming down the road from York was an army. Not a raiding party, not a local levy, but a proper army. Thousands of warriors in good order, their shields catching the sun, their spears like a forest of iron. Battle banners flew at the front, and even at this distance, I could see they were professional soldiers, moving with discipline and purpose. This was not Edwin and Morcar's northern levies. This was Harold Godwinson's own housecarls, the finest fighting men in England. "It is Harold," Tostig said quietly. His voice was strange, tight, with an emotion I could not name. "My brother has come." "How?" Harold demanded. "How is he here? He should be in the south, watching for William's Normans." Tostig shook his head. "He must have force-marched from London. 5 days, perhaps 6. He did not wait. He did not hesitate. He came straight for us." Harold stood silent for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not fear exactly, but calculation. He was weighing odds, counting warriors, measuring distances. We were outnumbered. We were unprepared. We were on the wrong side of the river with no easy retreat. A lesser man might have panicked. A lesser man might have ordered an immediate withdrawal, tried to make it back to the ships before the English could engage. But Harald Hardrada had fought in a dozen countries, had commanded the Varangian Guard, had earned his name through pure bloody-minded refusal to yield. He raised his sword, and his voice carried across the field. "We stand here. Form the shield wall on the far side of the bridge. Let the English come. We will show them what Norway's warriors can do." The jarls took up the cry, and the army began to move, streaming across the bridge to the far bank, where there was a slight rise that would give us advantage. But it was chaos. Men were still struggling into their mail, those who had brought it. Shields were being unlimbered. The line that formed was ragged, thin in places, not the solid wall we had made at Fulford. And behind us, the English kept coming. They reached the near side of the bridge within the hour. I had found my place in the shield wall by then. Third rank on the left flank, my axe heavy in my sweating hands. From where I stood, I could see across the river to where Harold Godwinson had halted his army. He sat on a black horse, surrounded by his housecarls, and even at this distance, he looked like a king. They said he and Harald Hardrada could have been brothers, both tall, both broad-shouldered, both commanding. But where our Harold was wild, all fury and legend, Harold Godwinson seemed cold, controlled. He did not rant or roar. He simply sat his horse and looked at us, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Tostig rode forward to the bridge, called across the water. We could not hear what was said, but we knew what it must be. Offers of negotiation perhaps, or challenges, or simple curses between brothers who had come to kill each other. The conversation did not last long. Tostig returned to our lines, and Harald Godwinson raised his hand. The English army began to advance. They came to the bridge and stopped. Of course they stopped. The bridge was narrow, room for only 2 men abreast, and our entire army waited on the far side with spears leveled and arrows nocked. To cross that bridge would be to die. The first ranks would be cut down before they made it halfway, shot full of arrows or speared like fish. It was a perfect defensive position. It was also a trap. If we stayed here, the English could simply wait us out, starve us into submission, or wait for reinforcements. If we retreated, we would have to cross the bridge ourselves, and the English would fall on our rear. Harald knew this. He stood at the center of our line, his face dark with thought, and I could see him weighing options. Then something happened that I still do not fully understand. A single Norwegian warrior, I did not know his name then, learned it only later from the survivors, walked onto the bridge. He was a huge man, broad as a bull, carrying a Dane axe and no shield. He wore only a leather jerkin, no mail, and his arms were bare. He walked to the center of the bridge and turned to face the English army. Then he began to laugh. It was a mad sound, wild and joyful, the laugh of a man who knows he is about to die and welcomes it. The English hesitated. Then someone gave an order, and a dozen warriors charged onto the bridge. The lone Norwegian met them with his axe. I cannot describe what followed except to say it was like watching a god fight. The narrow bridge meant the English could only come at him 2 at a time, and his axe was a blur of motion, faster than seemed possible for a weapon that size. The first man to reach him lost his head. Literally, the axe took it clean off, and the head bounced into the river. The second man got his shield up, but the axe smashed through it and caved in his chest. The third and fourth came together, and he killed them both with one great sideways swing that sent them toppling off the bridge into the water. More came. They kept coming, and he kept killing them. I watched from the shield wall, transfixed. We all watched. The English tried to push past him, tried to overwhelm him with numbers, but the bridge was too narrow and he was too fast. Bodies piled up on the planks. Blood made the wood slippery, and men lost their footing, fell into the river. Some tried to wade across instead, but the current was stronger than it looked, and their armor pulled them down. For half an hour, that one warrior held the bridge alone. 30 men, maybe 40, fell to his axe. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his leather jerkin hanging in tatters, but he would not fall. He would not yield. It was the most heroic thing I have ever seen. It was also futile. The English could not cross the bridge, but we could not break their army either. We were still trapped. And then someone on the English side, some clever, unheroic bastard, found a solution. A warrior with a spear climbed into a small boat, or perhaps a washtub. I heard different stories later. He floated under the bridge, hidden by the shadow and the spray, until he was directly beneath the lone Norwegian. Then he thrust his spear up through the gaps in the planks. The spear took the warrior in the groin, ripping up into his guts. He screamed. I heard it across the water, a sound of pure agony, and staggered. The English on the bridge surged forward, and this time he could not stop them. He fell, his body tumbling off into the river, and the English poured across. They hit our shield wall like a battering ram. I was in the third rank, so I did not take the initial impact, but I felt it. The whole line shuddered and bent, men crying out as spears found gaps in the shields. The warrior in front of me took a spear in the throat and went down, and suddenly I was in the second rank, then the first, my axe rising and falling as the English pressed forward. This was not like Fulford. At Fulford, we had been fresh, organized, confident. Here we were, exhausted from the march, half-armored, shocked by the sudden battle. The English were fresh and furious, their king at their backs urging them on. They wanted revenge for Fulford, wanted to drive us back into the sea, and they were winning. I killed 2 men in the press, caught one with my axe as he raised his sword, crushed another's skull when he slipped in the blood, but for every Englishman who fell, 3 more took his place. The noise was incredible, metal on metal, screaming, the wet sounds of blades and flesh, Harald's voice roaring somewhere behind me, trying to rally the line. The shield wall held for a time, but it was bending, breaking in places. On the right flank, I saw it give way entirely, the English pouring through the gap, rolling up our line from the side. Men were running now, streaming back toward the ships, and the English were among us, cutting them down as they fled. I looked for Harald, found him at the center of the collapsing formation. He had thrown away his sword and seized a 2-handed axe, was swinging it in great devastating arcs that scattered the English before him. He was singing, actually singing one of the old war songs about Odin's ravens, and his eyes were wild with battle madness. This was the Harald of legend, the Hardrada of the sagas, the warrior who had never been defeated. 3 English warriors came at him together, coordinated, professional. Harald's axe took the first in the ribs, but while he was pulling it free, the other 2 attacked. One got a spear past his guard, into his side. Harald roared and killed that man with a backhand blow, but the wound was bad, blood pouring down his leg. Then the arrows started. The English had brought up their archers, were shooting into our packed formation from close range. You could not dodge, could not raise a shield fast enough. Men went down all around me, feathered with shafts. I felt one pass so close to my face that the fletching brushed my cheek. Harald took an arrow in the shoulder, then another in the thigh. He was still fighting, still killing, but he was slowing, the fury draining out of him with his blood. The 3rd arrow hit him in the throat. It was a perfect shot, or the unluckiest shot in history, depending on how you think of such things. The arrow went straight through the unarmored flesh of his neck and came out the back. Harald dropped his axe. His hands went to his throat, trying to stem the blood, but it was pumping out between his fingers in great spurts. He fell to his knees. The English pulled back for a moment, shocked perhaps that this giant of a man could fall. Harald knelt there in the mud and blood, his hands at his throat, and he looked up at the sky. His lips moved, but I could not hear what he said. Then he fell forward onto his face and was still. The King of Norway was dead. The greatest warrior of our age had been killed by a single arrow on a muddy English riverbank, far from home, far from the throne he had come to claim. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush forward and drag his body from the field, give him some dignity in death. But there was no time. The English were coming again, and without Harald the army was breaking apart completely. Tostig tried to hold them. He rallied what he could of the center, managed to form a small knot of resistance around Harald's body. I saw him fighting like a madman, saw him kill 3 English warriors in as many heartbeats. But there were too many. The English swept over them, and Tostig went down under a wave of blades and spears. The rout was complete. Thousands of Norwegian warriors were running now, fleeing back toward Rickall and the ships. The English pursued, cutting down the slowest, the wounded, anyone who stumbled. I ran with them. I am not proud of it, but I ran. My axe was gone, dropped somewhere in the fighting. My shield was split. I had a cut on my arm, and another on my scalp, and I could feel blood running down my face. I ran through fields and over ditches, ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Behind us, the English kept coming. Then I saw the bridge. Not the bridge where the battle had started, but another smaller crossing, a rickety wooden structure over a stream about a mile from the main fighting. The fleeing Norwegians were bottlenecking there, pushing and shoving to get across. The English were perhaps 200 yards behind, closing fast. If they caught us at the bridge, it would be a massacre. I do not know what made me do what I did next. I was not particularly brave. I was not one of Harald's champions. I was just a herdman from Rogaland who had spent most of the battle trying not to die. But I looked at that bridge, and I looked at the fleeing warriors, and I thought of the lone Norwegian at Stamford who had held the English for half an hour. If he could do it, I could do it. I turned and ran back toward the bridge. "Olaf!" I shouted at one of my sword brothers. "Give me your axe!" He threw it to me without question, and I caught it, felt the weight of it in my hands. It was a proper Dane axe, long-hafted and well-balanced. Good enough. I stepped onto the bridge. The wood creaked under my boots. The stream below ran quick and clear, gurgling over rocks. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon. The sun was warm on my face. I could see fish in the water. I raised my axe and waited for the English to come. They hesitated when they saw me, just for a moment, perhaps remembering what had happened at the other bridge. Then an officer shouted something, and the first warriors started forward. There were 3 of them, housecarls by their gear, wearing proper mail and carrying long spears. They came at me warily, spreading out as much as the narrow bridge allowed, clearly intending to surround me. I let them come. When the first man lunged with his spear, I knocked it aside with the axe haft and stepped in close, too close for him to bring the spear to bear. My axe took him in the side, between the bottom of his mail and his belt. He screamed and fell, and his body blocked the bridge for a moment. The other 2 tried to push past him, but there was not room. I killed the second man with an overhead chop that split his shield and the arm holding it. The third managed to get his spear past my guard, and the point scraped along my ribs, a line of fire. But his thrust overextended him, and I hooked his leg with the axe and pulled. He went down hard, cracked his head on the bridge rail, and before he could recover, I finished him. 3 dead. The English pulled back, regrouping. Behind me, I could hear the Norwegian warriors streaming across the other end of the bridge, escaping. I had bought them time. I had bought them their lives. The English came again. This time, there were 5 of them, and they did not hesitate or give me room to maneuver. They rushed me all at once, a wall of shields and spears, trying to overwhelm me with sheer weight. I got 2 of them, one with a sideways sweep that took his legs out from under him, another with a thrust of the axe spike into his face. But the other 3 pressed forward, and I had to give ground. My heel caught on something, a dead man's leg perhaps, and I stumbled. A spear went over my shoulder so close I felt the wind of it. An axe, one of them had an axe, crashed into my shield and split it in 2. I threw the broken shield at the nearest man, caught him in the face, and used the moment to fall back 3 steps. The bridge was slick with blood now, treacherous footing. Bodies lay heaped where they had fallen. The smell of iron and shit filled my nose. My arm was screaming with pain from the effort of swinging the axe. I was breathing in great ragged gasps, my vision starting to narrow. But they had not crossed. They had not gotten past me. The English officer was shouting orders, pulling his men back again. I saw him pointing at me, gesturing. They were learning. They were adapting. They would find a way past me eventually, overwhelm me with arrows, or get someone under the bridge like they had before, or simply wait until I collapsed from exhaustion. But every moment I held them was another moment for my countrymen to escape. Every heartbeat was another life saved. So I raised my axe and waited. They came again, and again, and again. I lost count of how many I killed. 6, 7, 10. The bodies piled up until the bridge was more corpse than wood. Some of the dead were English, some were Norwegian, men who had tried to cross during the fighting and been caught in the chaos. I stepped on faces, on hands, on the soft parts of bellies where the guts had spilled out. The world narrowed to the span of the bridge, the reach of my axe, the next enemy coming to kill me. My left arm was useless, hanging limp at my side. I had taken a sword cut to the shoulder, deep enough that I could see bone. My ribs were broken on the right side where a spear thrust had gotten through. Blood ran into my eyes from a scalp wound. Every breath was agony, but I was still standing. I was still killing. I was still holding the bridge. Then I heard it. A sound that did not belong. A creaking beneath me, the groan of stressed wood. I looked down and saw the planks of the bridge starting to bow, to crack. Too much weight. Too many bodies. Too much blood making the wood swell and weaken. The bridge was going to collapse. I had perhaps seconds. I looked back over my shoulder and saw that the last of the Norwegian warriors were across the far end, disappearing into the distance. They were safe. My job was done. I could run. I could abandon the bridge, try to make it to the ships with the others. I might even survive. But I was so tired. My legs felt like water. My chest was full of blood. I could taste it in my throat, bubbling up with every breath. I knew I would not make it, and I knew what the sagas would say if I ran now, if I abandoned this post after holding it so long. They would say I was a coward. They would say I broke at the end. They would forget everything that came before. I planted my feet and raised my axe one more time. The English came. There were a dozen of them now, rushing forward in a mass, determined to finish this. I met the first man with the axe, felt the impact shiver up my arms, killed him, or wounded him badly enough that he went down. The second man's spear took me in the thigh and I felt my leg buckle. The third man's sword cut deep into my side, and I knew that was a mortal wound, knew I had heartbeats left at most, but I kept swinging, kept fighting, kept holding. Then I felt the bridge shift beneath me, heard the final crack of breaking timber, and I was falling. The water hit me like a fist, cold and shocking. I went under, the current pulling at me, and my armor. I was wearing my mail after all, had put it on at some point during the fighting, though I could not remember when. My armor pulled me down. I tried to kick, to swim, but my leg would not work, and my arm would not work, and there was water in my lungs, filling me up. I opened my eyes underwater and saw the surface above me, bright with sunlight. I saw the shapes of men on the ruined bridge, looking down. I saw a fish dart past, silver scales flashing. Then the current pulled me under a fallen log, and everything went dark. I thought I was dead. Perhaps I was, for a time. But somehow, the gods know how, I washed up on a shallow bank half a mile downstream. I lay there coughing water and blood, my body a map of pain. I could not move my legs, could not feel my left arm at all, but I was alive. For a few more moments at least, I was alive. I could hear battle sounds in the distance, screaming, the clash of weapons. It took me a long time to understand what I was hearing. Then I remembered. Eystein Ore. Harald had left forces at the ships under Eystein's command. When the battle started, someone must have run to warn them. Eystein must have marched his men to help, force marching them 7 miles in full armor in the afternoon heat. They would have arrived exhausted, barely able to stand, and found the English army waiting for them. They fought anyway. Of course they fought. They were Norwegian warriors, and their king had fallen, and they would not leave his body on the field for the English to desecrate. I like to think they fought well. I like to think they made Harold Godwinson pay for every foot of ground. But they were exhausted and outnumbered, and the day was already lost. The sounds of battle faded. Silence fell, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the cawing of ravens. I lay on the riverbank and watched the sky turn orange, then red, then purple. The pain was fading now, or perhaps I was just fading, the edges of my vision going grey. I thought about my father's farm in Rogaland. I thought about the first time I held an axe, how heavy it seemed then. I thought about Harald Hardrada, the greatest king I had ever known, lying dead in an English field. I thought about all the warriors who had died today, whose names would be forgotten, whose deeds would be lost. We had come to conquer England. We had come to win glory and gold and kingdoms. We had lost everything. The Viking Age was over. I knew it as surely as I knew I was dying. There would be no more great fleets, no more invasions, no more jarls and hirdmen sailing to foreign shores to take what they wanted. We had pushed too far, reached too high, and the world had changed beneath our feet. Norway would fight its own civil wars now, squabble over Harold's inheritance. England would fall to the Normans. I had heard men speak of William's gathering fleet, knew he would come soon now that Harold had exhausted his army in the north. Everything we had fought for was dust. Everything we had died for meant nothing. But I had held the bridge. In the end, when everything else was lost, I had held the bridge. I had given my brothers time to escape. I had bought them their lives with my own. The sagas might not remember me. I was no one, just a herdman from Rogaland. But I would remember. In whatever hall waited for me beyond death, I would remember. And I would know I had not broken. I would know I had been worthy. The last thing I saw was a raven landing on the branch above me. It cocked its head, studied me with one bright eye, and I thought, Odin's bird, come to carry me to Valhalla. Then the darkness took me, and I knew no more. But this is not where my story ends. This is where it becomes something else, a memory, a ghost, a voice speaking across the centuries to tell you what I saw and what I learned. Because I did not die there on that riverbank. Not entirely. Some part of me remained, watching, remembering, and I have watched what came after. I watched the English bury their dead and count the cost. 4,000 Norwegians dead, maybe more. The flower of Norway's warriors left to rot in English soil. Of the 300 ships that came, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. Harald's son Olaf survived, was allowed to sail back to Norway with the remnants of the army. He and his brother Magnus would split their father's kingdom and spend years fighting each other for the whole. Norway would never be the same. 3 days after Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy landed at Pevensey. Harald Godwinson marched south with his exhausted, bloodied army and met William at Hastings. He fought bravely. He died bravely, an arrow in his eye according to some tales, cut down by Norman knights according to others. England got a new king anyway, just not the one we had planned. The Normans brought their own ways, their own language, their own laws. Within a generation, the old English nobility was gone, replaced by French-speaking lords. Within a century, the language itself had changed, absorbed so much French that it became something new. Anglo-Saxon England died at Hastings, but it was already dying at Stamford Bridge. We killed it, in a way. We drove Harold north, forced him to spend his strength and his best warriors against us. When he faced William, he had nothing left. If we had not come, if Harald Hardrada had stayed in Norway and tended his own kingdom. But there is no profit in such thoughts. The gods write our fates. We merely live them. I think about Harold sometimes, in whatever passes for thought in this half-existence. I think about how close he came. If we had not been caught unprepared at Stamford Bridge, if we had been wearing our armor, if Harald Godwinson had been delayed even one more day, Harald Hardrada might have been King of England. The whole course of history might have turned on those few moments. But history is made of such moments. A lone warrior holding a bridge, an arrow finding an unarmored throat, a choice to march light instead of armored. These small things, these trivial things, and kingdoms rise and fall upon them. The other thing I think about is the bridge itself. Both bridges, actually. The one at Stamford where the unnamed warrior held the English, and the smaller one where I made my stand. No one remembers the second bridge. I doubt anyone even knows where it was. It probably collapsed entirely in the first winter storm, washed away by the same river that nearly took my life. But it mattered. For half an hour, maybe less, it was the most important place in the world. Lives hung on it. Fates turned on it. And then it was gone. Forgotten. As if it had never been. That is what I learned in my final moments. That is what I would tell you, if you could hear me. Glory fades. Kingdoms fall. Even the greatest warriors become dust, and their deeds become stories. And eventually, the stories themselves are forgotten. But the moment matters. The choice to stand or run, to fight or flee, to hold the bridge or abandon it. That choice echoes forward in ways we cannot imagine. All those Norwegian warriors who escaped because I held the bridge for a few more moments, they went home. They had children. Those children had children. Somewhere in Norway today, there are people alive who would never have been born if I had run. Somewhere in England, there are people who exist only because an English warrior died on my axe instead of surviving to have different children in a different time. We think history is made by kings and jarls, by great battles and famous warriors. But it is made by all of us. Every moment, every choice, every small stand on a forgotten bridge. I held the bridge. That is what I did. That is what I was. And when the bridge fell and the water took me, when my blood mixed with the blood of all the others who died that day, I knew I had done enough. I had been enough. The sagas may not remember Bjorn Eriksson, but I remember, and that is sufficient. Now the centuries have passed like water over stones, wearing everything smooth and strange. The England I died in is gone. The Norway I left is gone. The men I fought with are gone. Even the language we spoke has changed so much that if you heard it, you would not recognize it as English or Norse. But the river is still there. The land is still there. And somewhere, buried in a field near Stamford Bridge, are the bones of 8,000 warriors who came to conquer a kingdom and found only death. Harald Hardrada is one of them. Tostig Godwinson is one of them. Eystein Ore is one of them. And Bjorn Eriksson, son of Erik, hirdman of Harald, holder of the bridge, is one of them. We came for glory. We came for gold. We came because our king commanded and our oaths demanded and the sagas promised us immortality. We got none of it. We got mud and blood and a shallow grave in foreign soil. We got our names forgotten and our deeds reduced to numbers in a chronicle. We got the end of everything we knew. But I do not regret it. Even now, even knowing how it ended, I do not regret it. Because for a moment, for one shining, terrible, perfect moment, I stood on that bridge with my axe in my hands, and I was alive. I was a warrior. I was worthy. And that is enough. That has to be enough, because it is all any of us get. One moment of clarity, one choice that defines us, one stand, on one bridge, against the whole weight of history. And then the water takes us, and we are gone, and the world moves on without us. But the choice remains, the stand remains, the bridge, even in its ruin, even in its forgetting, remains. I held the bridge. Remember that, if you remember nothing else. I held the bridge, and I did not run, and when the end came, I met it with my axe in my hands and my face to the enemy. That is how a warrior dies. That is how a man dies. And if the gods are just, if there is any justice in the 9 realms, then somewhere in Valhalla there is a bridge, and I am standing on it still, and I will stand on it forever. That is my story. That is my truth. I was there when the Viking Age ended. I was there when the last great invasion failed. I was there when Harald Hardrada fell, and Norway's dreams of empire died with him. I was Bjorn Eriksson. I held the bridge, and I would do it again.